What if something as ordinary as the color of your eyes could be connected to one of the strangest stories preserved in an ancient religious text? For centuries, people have looked at unusual physical traits and wondered whether they might carry traces of something ancient, a forgotten ancestry, an extinct people, a bloodline that disappeared from history. And now, a controversial claim surrounding the Book of Enoch has taken that question in a completely different direction. The claim says that certain eye colors are connected to what some describe as an old blood, an ancient bloodline associated with the mysterious beings described in Enoch. And the question that immediately follows is almost impossible to ignore. Could the color of someone's eyes reveal something about their ancestry? At first, this sounds like pure internet mythology. But then you open the Book of Enoch, and you discover that the ancient text really does contain an extraordinary story about watchers, human women, giants, flesh and blood, and corruption that spreads across the earth. Enoch describes the watchers abandoning their heavenly position and taking human women as wives. Their unions produce giant offspring, and the consequences become catastrophic. The text even describes the giants as being produced from spirit and flesh, and later speaks about spirits emerging from their bodies. So where does the modern idea about eye color come from? Does Enoch actually name particular eye colors? Does it describe physical traits that could be interpreted as evidence of an ancient bloodline? Or has a much more recent theory been attached to an ancient story that never actually said it? That's what we're going to investigate. And I want you to stay until the end because we're going to separate what the Book of Enoch actually says from what people have added to it over time. If you enjoy investigations into the Book of Enoch, Nephilim, Watchers, ancient bloodlines, biblical mysteries, and forgotten texts, subscribe to the 9th tablet. Because today we're asking a question that sounds almost impossible. Can an ancient text really tell us anything about the bloodlines of people living thousands of years later? Eye colors. It begins with the Watchers. According to the Book of Enoch, there was a group of heavenly beings assigned to watch over humanity. But instead of remaining faithful to their purpose, they descended to earth and chose human women as wives. Their leader is named Samiaza, and together with other watchers, they crossed the boundary that heaven had forbidden. What happened next changed the course of Enoch's story. The women became pregnant and gave birth to beings unlike ordinary humans. Enoch calls them giants, and later Jewish tradition connects them with the Nephilim mentioned in Genesis 6. These giants grew powerful, violent, and destructive, consuming everything around them until the earth was filled with corruption. But Enoch goes even further. The text says the Watchers taught humanity knowledge that was never meant to be revealed in that way: weapon-making, sorcery, astrology, cosmetics, precious stones, and forbidden arts. According to Enoch, this knowledge accelerated corruption across the earth. This is why many readers believe Enoch isn't just telling a story about giants. He's telling a story about a corrupted bloodline, a mixture of heavenly rebellion and human flesh. And that's exactly where the modern theory begins. If the Watchers produced offspring with human women, could traces of that bloodline have survived the flood? Some people answer yes. Others say absolutely not. And surprisingly, both sides claim the Book of Enoch supports them. That disagreement is where this mystery becomes much deeper. Because before we ask whether eye colors reveal an ancient bloodline, we first need to ask a more important question. Did the bloodline survive at all? If you're enjoying this investigation into the Book of Enoch, the Watchers, Nephilim, and ancient biblical mysteries, subscribe to the 9th tablet. We don't just repeat viral theories, we investigate where they came from and what the ancient texts actually say. Now we arrive at the part of the mystery that most people skip. The eye colors. Because if you go back to the actual text of 1 Enoch, something immediately becomes clear. Enoch describes the Watchers. It describes their human wives. It describes the giants born from their union. It describes flesh and blood. It describes corruption. And it describes the spirits of the dead giants. But there is something the text does not do. It does not give us a list saying, these eye colors belong to the ancient bloodline. There is no passage in the Book of Enoch that explicitly identifies blue eyes, green eyes, gray eyes, hazel eyes, or brown eyes as genetic markers of the Watchers or their descendants. And that distinction is extremely important. So where did the modern theory come from? It appears to come from a much broader attempt to connect ancient bloodline theories with unusual physical characteristics. People look at the story of the Watchers and ask, if something extraordinary happened in the ancient world, the giants really existed, and if their ancestry somehow survived, wouldn't there have to be physical traces? And from there, theories about unusual features begin to appear. Eye color becomes particularly attractive because it is one of the most visible inherited traits a person can have. You don't need a laboratory. You don't need an archaeological excavation. You simply look into someone's eyes. And suddenly, an ordinary physical characteristic becomes part of a much larger story. But here's where we need to slow down, because there is a huge difference between. This theory is interesting. And the Book of Enoch proves this theory. Those are not the same statement. Enoch gives us the ancient story. The eye color connection is a modern interpretation layered onto that story. And ironically, that makes the mystery even more fascinating. Because now we have two separate questions. What does Enoch actually say about the ancient bloodline? And why have modern people connected that story to specific eye colors? To answer the second question, we have to go deeper into the idea of what survived after the giants were destroyed. And this is where Enoch gives us something genuinely strange. This is where the story takes a strange turn. According to 1 Enoch, the giants were not simply ordinary human beings. They were described as the result of an unnatural union between the Watchers and human women, what Enoch describes as a mixture of spirit and flesh. And when those giants eventually died, something even stranger was said to happen. Enoch describes spirits emerging from their bodies. These spirits were identified as evil spirits, and their origin was connected to both humans and the Holy Watchers. The text says these spirits would remain on the earth and afflict humanity. That detail matters because it changes the question. Instead of asking only, did the giant bodies survive? We now have another question. What exactly survived? The physical giants? Their descendants? Their spirits? Or nothing physical at all? Enoch itself is much clearer about the spirits than it is about a surviving physical bloodline. In fact, when the text describes the coming flood, it says that Noah's seed would be preserved for future generations, while the earth and its inhabitants would face destruction. So we have to be careful. The text gives us a story about supernatural beings producing giant offspring. It gives us a story about those giants being destroyed. And it gives us a story about their spirits continuing to trouble humanity. But it does not give us a clear genealogical record saying, some of the giant blood survived through these particular human families. And it certainly doesn't say, you can identify those descendants by their eye color. That is where the modern theory goes beyond the ancient text. But there's still something fascinating here. Because if the Book of Enoch doesn't identify the eye colors, why did modern people choose eye color in the first place? Why not height? Hair color? Skin tone? A particular facial feature? Why did the theory focus on the eyes? To understand that, we need to look at the psychology and the biology behind the claim. Because eye color really is inherited. And that simple fact can make an extraordinary theory sound much more convincing than it actually is. And that's where the mystery gets even deeper. Now we have reached the question that the viral title makes sound simple. Which eye colors does the Book of Enoch actually name? And here's where the investigation takes an unexpected turn. It doesn't. At least not in the way the modern theory claims. The surviving text of 1 Enoch does not provide a list of eye colors belonging to the Watchers, the giants, or their supposed descendants. Its descriptions focus on the Watchers, their union with human women, the giants, their violence, and the spirits that proceed from them. So if someone tells you, Enoch says people with blue eyes carry the ancient blood, or Enoch identifies green-eyed people as descendants of the Watchers, you should immediately ask, show me the chapter and verse. Because that's where sensational claims should be tested. And there is an interesting detail that may help explain some of the confusion. In the early chapters, Enoch mentions the beautification of the eyelids with antimony, along with precious stones and coloring substances. But notice what that is. It is a reference to cosmetics and adornment taught by Azazel. It isn't a description of someone's natural eye color. That distinction matters. The text also describes the giants as being produced from spirit and flesh, and says that after their deaths, spirits proceeded from their bodies and became evil spirits on the earth. So Enoch absolutely gives us an extraordinary story about mixed origins, flesh, spirits, giants, and corruption. What it does not give us is a genetic chart. No list of eye colors. No family tree. No statement saying that a particular color proves someone carries Watcher blood. And that means the viral eye color claim should be treated as a modern interpretation, not a direct teaching of Enoch. But now comes the fascinating part. If Enoch doesn't name these eye colors, why did this theory become so compelling in the first place? To understand that, we need to look at what eye color actually tells us about ancestry, and where science ends and speculation begins. Now we have to separate biology from mythology. Because there is a real reason eye color feels like such a powerful clue. Eye color is inherited. It is influenced by multiple genes that affect how much melanin is present in the iris and how light is scattered through it. So when people see a particular eye color appearing repeatedly within a family, they naturally connect it with ancestry. And that part is completely reasonable. Your physical traits can contain information about your ancestry. But here's where the leap happens. Someone notices that a particular eye color is relatively uncommon in their family, then connects that unusual trait to an ancient population. And eventually the story becomes, maybe this is evidence of an ancient bloodline. That's where we have to stop and ask for evidence. Because an unusual physical characteristic doesn't automatically identify a specific ancient lineage. Blue eyes don't prove Watcher ancestry. Green eyes don't prove Nephilim ancestry. Hazel eyes don't prove a connection to the giants. And brown eyes certainly don't tell us that someone belongs to an ordinary bloodline while another color belongs to a supernatural one. There is simply no passage in 1 Enoch that gives us that conclusion. What Enoch does give us is something different, and arguably more fascinating. It describes a world where heavenly beings and human beings crossed a boundary, producing giants whose origin was described as coming from both spirit and flesh. After their destruction, the text says spirits came forth from their bodies and became evil spirits that continued to trouble humanity. That's the ancient claim. The eye color connection comes later. So if someone has blue, green, gray, hazel, or brown eyes, the Book of Enoch gives us no basis for declaring that person part of an ancient supernatural bloodline. But that still leaves one fascinating question. If the eye color theory isn't actually stated by Enoch, why has it become so popular? And the answer may have less to do with ancient manuscripts, and more to do with the human fascination with hidden ancestry. So we've reached the point where the modern theory and the ancient text finally collide. And this is where we need to be precise. 1 Enoch absolutely gives us an ancient story about a strange bloodline. The Watchers were heavenly beings. They took human women. Those women gave birth to giants. And Enoch describes those giants as being produced from spirit and flesh. That's not something we've invented. It's actually in the text. But then the theory makes another leap. It says, if this mixture of heavenly and human beings produced a distinct lineage, perhaps physical characteristics survived among human populations. And one of the characteristics people have chosen is eye color. Here's the problem. Enoch never makes that connection. There is no genealogy of blue-eyed descendants. No list of green-eyed Watcher bloodlines. No statement that gray or hazel eyes identify the offspring of the giants. And no passage telling future generations to examine someone's eyes to determine their ancestry. What Enoch actually says is something stranger. After the giants are destroyed, their spirits proceed from their bodies, and those spirits become evil spirits that remain on the earth and afflict humanity. So according to the text itself, the thing that survives is primarily described in spiritual, not genetic terms. And that completely changes how we should understand the viral eye color claim. The ancient text gives us a supernatural origin story. The modern theory gives us a genetic interpretation. Those are two very different things. But there's still a fascinating question left. If the Book of Enoch doesn't identify eye colors, could later traditions, folklore, or modern theories have connected unusual physical traits with ancient peoples for other reasons? Because the human fascination with hidden ancestry is far older than the internet. And once we understand that fascination, The eye color theory begins to look very different. So where does that leave us? After following the story from the Watchers, to the giants, to the strange description of spirit and flesh, and finally to the modern claims about eye color, we're left with a conclusion that is actually more fascinating than the viral claim. The Book of Enoch does describe an ancient bloodline mystery, but it does not give us a genetic eye color test. Enoch says the Watchers took human women and produced giants. It describes those giants as coming from spirit and flesh, and it says that after their deaths, spirits proceeded from their bodies and became evil spirits on the earth. That is what the ancient text actually gives us. The modern idea that particular eye colors identify descendants is something else. It is an interpretation layered onto the story. And that's an important distinction, not because it makes the mystery boring, but because it tells us where the real mystery begins. Why do modern people feel such a strong desire to find physical evidence of an ancient supernatural bloodline? Why do we look at unusual traits and wonder whether they connect us to forgotten peoples? And why does the idea of an ancient lineage surviving through history feel so compelling? Perhaps because ancestry is one of the deepest mysteries of human identity. We all want to know where we came from. And when an ancient text tells us that heavenly beings crossed into the human world and produced extraordinary offspring, it's almost inevitable that later generations will begin asking, could something of that story still be with us? But we shouldn't confuse a fascinating possibility with established history. If your eyes are blue, green, hazel, gray, or brown, 1 Enoch gives us no basis for declaring that your eye color proves Watcher or Nephilim ancestry. The ancient text simply doesn't make that claim. And that may be the most important revelation of this entire investigation. Because sometimes the truth isn't that an ancient book gave us a secret answer, but that it gave us a mystery that people are still trying to solve thousands of years later. And in our final act, we're going to bring everything together and answer the question that started this investigation. What, if anything, could actually have survived from the ancient bloodline described by Enoch?